Module 2: Patriarchy's Impact on the South Asian Immigrant Community in Canada. Part 3: Colonialism, Capitalism, and Patriarchy. Settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is not an event that happened a long time ago. It is an ongoing structure, and the logics, practices, and identities that continue to shape present-day race, gender, class, and sexual mores. The nexus of colonialism, racism, capitalism, and patriarchy continues to subjugate racialized women, including South Asians. Colonialism and genocide. The main goal of settler colonialism was to acquire land and gain control of resources for capitalists to make profits. This was accomplished through genocide, forced removal of indigenous populations from territories desired by white settlers, and later assimilation. Assimilation was achieved both biologically through intermarriage to dilute indigenous blood, and culturally by stripping indigenous populations of their culture and replacing it with settler culture. Colonialism and property relations. The settler colonial culture is both patriarchal and capitalist in nature. Indigenous culture generally was intuitive, which is in direct contrast to the modernist property ownership regime that transforms not only land and resources, but people too, into objects that can be owned. Settler colonialism marks boundaries to limit something to be owned, then brings in an operational system that enforces that boundary as a legally binding record of ownership which can be passed on or sold to another. Settler colonialism and patriarchy. Settler colonialists also brought with them the patriarchal concept of the nuclear family, where the man is the head of the family. He passes down his property to his male heirs, and women's role is to provide procreational and caregiving services. In contrast, indigenous cultures did not demarcate labor based starkly on sex or gender. They tended to work more communally. The colonial patriarchal sexual division of labor ensures that women are kept within the folds of the household, mostly to maintain the line of descent and to cater to the male members of the family as unpaid domestic workers. Private property and patriarchy. Frederick Engels, in his famous book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, provides a materialist analysis of how the family as we know it came to be, with the rise of class society and with it the oppression of women. Engels argues that the domestication of animals and the advent of agriculture made it possible for human beings to create more than the bare minimum they needed to survive. For the first time in human history, there was an accumulation of surplus or wealth. To ensure that this wealth was passed on to a man's own biological children, women's sexual subjugation into monogamy was required. And hence the monogamous family became the means where property could be passed down from generation to generation. Colonial capitalist heteropatriarchy. The nexus of patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism centers a heterosexual white man who owns land, is in a child-producing monogamous heterosexual relationship, is the head of the family, and engages in economic activity, while the women stay at home, procreate, and provide care for the children and the elderly. In capitalism, if something cannot be commodified, it is of lesser or no value. As women in patriarchy provide care and do housework, which is not financially rewarded, their contribution to their household, their societies, and their economies is devalued and diminished. Colonialists encouraged and enforced the formation of heteropatriarchal nuclear households in order to assimilate indigenous populations in Canada and in most colonized regions. Colonization replaced a more egalitarian communal living where both women and men held leadership positions into this system of owning and cultivating individual plots of land that would transform Indigenous men into citizen farmers and Indigenous women into compliant farm wives. Neo-colonialism. This project to subjugate and, quote, civilize racialized populations across the globe continues today. And even in modern-day Western democracies, the system was rigged against people of color in general and against women of color in particular, who have been fighting the multiple battles against racism, patriarchy, and capitalism.